Cult of Copy. Also, normies that may not actually currently be members of the Cult of Copy. This is a sort of episode 0 of resurrecting the Cult of Copy show, which I used to do weekly back in the day, but YouTube tells me it's been about 6 years since I had previously done a long live episode. The Cult of Copy show is typically an hour long. I'll try to do it every week on the same day at the same time, but this is new. I'm trying out Wednesday. We'll see if it works. I am the Reverend Dr. Sarah Colin Deuterio Pontifex Maximus of the Cult of Copy. The Cult of Copy is started as a Facebook group, a discussion group for working internet copywriters, which I was at the time. Started it in 2012, so it's been quite a while. And we have like 30,000 members there, tons of trainings, tons of educational resources for copywriters. Not just your typical copywriter, but people who want to be smart and care about craft, care about art, and geek out about this stuff. So that's kind of what the show is about. Let's get started without further ado. I say that, but the very first thing I have to tell you about is today's topic is identifying patterns in the marketplace and puncturing them in order to profit from doing that. I am doing a training, a live training. Anyone is invited. This Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. I usually do new trainings on Fridays every week. This one is 13 pattern busting attention grabbers. So it's going to work off of a lot of the foundational stuff we're going to talk about for free here in today's show. But it'll also include 13 specific applications and examples of usages of this pattern breaking philosophy for grabbing attention for your business or your client's business or whatever you want to do. All right, let me pull up my notes here. we did the intro. I told you who I am and what the show is. We did context to tell you what this episode is about. I'm tearing through my notes before even getting started. I did the training pitch. Very good. You heard about that. Oh, I didn't tell you how to get it. After this live video is over, I'll put the link here in the description of the YouTube video. If you're a member of the Cult of Copy group or a subscriber of the daily newsletter at cultofcopy.com, I've been talking about it there. You can get it there as well. I will tell you, if you leave me a comment wherever it is that you're seeing this and tell me why you might want this training or what you'll use it for, or even just ask nicely, I will try to message you back and give you a special discount code. If you're watching this at some point in the future and that link that I mentioned down below goes somewhere else, probably to our monthly membership for training, that just means the current offer is over because we recorded it. End of promo. Let's get to the content. So, as we said, today we're going to talk about patterns, identifying patterns in your marketplace so you can break them and gain the interest and attention and consideration of the prospects in your marketplace. So, a couple of things I want to talk about before we get started. The basis for the ideas that I'm talking about are established in the science of psychology. Now, I'm not a psychologist, not a scientist. These are things that I've read about. You can read about them too. They're good Wikipedia articles on the things that we're going to talk about. I just want to get that out of the way. I'm just a writer who finds these things interesting. I found them to be true in my work. So, 2 psychological effects we're going to talk about today. First is the Zeigarnik effect, and the second is the von Restorff effect. I think these scientists discovered these effects, and we'll talk about them in detail. I think they're actually both sort of part of the same thing that is part of human biology, and they're just sort of describing simple ways to approach that particular phenomenon. So let's talk about them first. The Zeigarnik effect is that people have a tendency to be preoccupied with, to be interested in incomplete patterns. So when there is a pattern that is recognizable to an individual, if there's a hole in that pattern in some way, a gap, they almost involuntarily give up brain power to retain that pattern and its missing piece and be on the lookout for what's going to close that loop and complete that pattern in their mind. We can use this in marketing in a number of ways if you're familiar with the concept of open loops, which is where you start telling a prospect a story and you leave out a part and you open another story and continue it. And you can see this in fiction too. There are a lot of stories that work this way. You can also see it very easily in like serialized fiction, like comic books or soap operas, where they'll close some loops, but they're always opening new ones that you have to watch the next episode in order to fulfill that pattern and close it. And that's one of the ways they become addictive to people who need to see how the story turns out. They need to close that loop. They need to complete that pattern. The reason people feel that way is something this scientist woman way back in the day, Bulma Zeigarnik, observed. The other psychological principle that we're going to bring into play today is called the von Restorff effect. Now, I think her name was Hedwig, another lady scientist from back in the day. What she discovered is if you have a pattern and there's something in that sequence that is different or unique that stands out, people are more likely to remember that one than the rest. So if I were to say to you, you know, shoe, hat, shirt, skirt, shorts, pants, banana, overalls, jacket, coat, socks, you may not remember all of the clothing items that I listed out. You may remember that the list was of clothing, but the one that will stand out to you is the banana. You're more likely to remember that one than any of the other ones. That's based on the experiments that she ran. How does this integrate with the Zeigarnik effect? I've mentioned that those two things are sort of two sides of the same effect, and I think it comes from biology, so we'll talk about that. But the idea, again, Zeigarnik effect is the mind has an affinity for incomplete patterns, and the von Restorff effect is that the mind tends to remember the odd thing out in a sequence. These two things are connected. So if you think back in evolutionary history, when humans were much more primitive, let's say tree-dwelling apes or monkeys of some kind way back in our ancient history. And if you don't believe in that, pretend to for the sake of this conversation. Back then, you're living in the trees. There's the swirling green of the jungle foliage all around you. And the way your brain works is all of that green sameness is safe because there's nothing standing out in it. It's just all leaves and branches, right? So your brain is evolved to become bored with patterns. And that's a good thing. It's a survival mechanism. I know in our modern times we hate being bored, but boredom is safety. There's nothing that's going to hurt you or nothing you need from a pattern that's boring. Your brain can safely ignore it, not spend any precious brain power or energy processing a pattern that doesn't change. Instead, it reserves your brain's energy for things that break the pattern of green. So when you're an ape living in the trees, that could be bright colored fruit. Hey, I'm going to go eat that. It could be, birds and things have brightly colored differences between the genders. So it could be like the bright colors of a mate or a dance that a mate is doing, or I don't know, bright red baboon butts. I'm not, I'm no Jack Hanna, but you get the idea. So something to move towards, something to pursue, or it could be a predator potentially, right? It breaks the pattern. Something's moving in a way that not the rest of the trees aren't. It's got a pattern, a color that isn't matching. it grabs your attention almost involuntarily, because things that break the pattern require your attention to know if you're safe or not, or if you need to go chase that thing. That is what I think is at play when we're looking at the two psychological effects of the Zeigarnik effect and the von Restorff effect. I think they're both part of the same thing. In other words, a pattern that's established is boring and you can ignore it, but a hole in the pattern or something that stands out from the pattern, in the case of Zeigarnik and or the von Restorff effect, is something that grabs your attention and you can't stop thinking about it because your brain is evolved that way. It could be fight or flight. It could be, fuck or fatality. Whatever the case is, it's something that requires your attention because it breaks the pattern. So let's go back to those psychological principles. When you're doing marketing, you want to stand out from the competition. You want to stand apart, even though you may sell the exact same things that other people sell, or at least to the non-fully educated consumer, they may think you sell the same things as other people do, all things considered, without digging into your differentiators. So how can you stand out in the marketplace? And how can you make sure that they remember you as being a unique provider of something or other? The way you do that is first you look at all the competition, right? You look at all the marketing everyone else is doing. You can subscribe to their lists, you can read their ads, you can watch their videos, consume their content, whatever the case is. You are looking for the way that every other provider in the market is the same. And then, once you know that, you can figure out, how can you do something different? Everyone is this, but I do that. And it's a simple process of evaluation and just looking to see what the pattern is. Unfortunately, humans are evolved to be pattern recognition machines. Again, it's key to our survival, and it's key to us being able to create tools and things that exploit the environment, is because we can spot patterns that we can take advantage of. Observation of seasons in agriculture, for example, are things that we observe the pattern in nature and then learn to exploit that pattern with tools. So your brain's built for it. You're looking at all the competing marketing and whatnot that's out there. And you're looking for, how is this all the same? How is it boring? How is it bland? How is it vanilla? Homogeneous, as they say. And what can I do to stand out and break that pattern? And once you figure that out, what's unique about you, I'll give you an example using myself in a minute if I remember to. Once you've figured out what stands apart about you, how do you effectively message that to an audience so they observe it, agree with it, and are compelled by it? So, to use myself as an example, as a way that I stand out, at the time that I got involved in not just copywriting, but consulting and positioning myself as a person with a unique take on it, compared to everybody else doing it. At the time, lots of people were, like biz bro culture was just taking off. So like a lot of wearing the suit, a lot of hustle grind, a lot of, if you don't want it as bad as I do, you're not going to get a better result. So I say I positioned myself, but really I was looking at what was unique about me that I thought would just be a differentiator, because I had already had concurrent results, right? Like writing copy for clients, I was able to get them results on par with anybody else charging the same amount as me. I decided to lean into things about my own personality. I'm not a 24/7 hustle grind bro when it comes to business, right? Like the reason I got into business is because I value my free time. I was starting a family at the time. I did not want to be tied down to a job and taking on client work. So this idea of me branching out and using the contents of my brain to make money instead of the output of my fingers, I leaned into the idea that I'm a quote unquote lazy person. Now, I'm not the inventor of this marketing angle by far. Plenty of other people have done the lazy angle when it comes to business. What I lean into is the idea that I seek efficiencies. I want to do things fast. I want to do them easy. I don't want to make things more complicated than they need to be, unlike, say, consultants that want to make things seem so complicated because they don't want you to understand what they're doing, because then they're upset if you fire them. Like they want to make it seem complicated because that's advantageous to them. That's not my bag. I always focus on the simplest, most effective way to do things first, and then we test and iterate from there. That's just one example of I looked at the market and saw what everyone else was saying and doing, how they were positioning themselves. I offered an alternative. Now, does that speak to everyone in the market? Not necessarily, but it speaks to a large enough segment in the market that people were interested enough to come to me for that particular difference. Maybe they saw themselves in me. Maybe it was that, but I used a variety of angles to stand out. Like, for example, again, not a business bro in appearance. This is a hat from a comic book artist. My little pins say lawful evil because I'm a gaming nerd. I'm not wearing a graphic t-shirt today, but I often do. I don't necessarily present the same image. And so business owners that look more like me, talk more like me, are interested in the same things as me, are more likely to choose me to speak to because they feel a kinship with me as opposed to other people that have the business suit, slick hair, shiny smile approach to business, right? And that's just not who I ever was. I'm not pretending, but I'm broadcasting my differentiators. So enough about me. Those are just some examples of what I'm talking about. So when you look at the von Restorff effect combined with the Zeigarnik effect, how does that come into play? So with the Zeigarnik effect, you want to tap into that affinity for incomplete patterns. So in your content, in your marketing, in the way that you speak to your prospective audience of customers, you talk about the pattern of sameness. I'm sure you've hired people to do XYZ or you've looked into ABC, and I'm sure you've seen these particular things that are not so great, right? Recurring patterns. You're pointing out negative things that you want them to observe and make sure that they will notice them again and again. You can even say, what are these, what is it that people in this space have in common? And you can name those big, broad negatives that apply to many of them in overlapping ways. You say, well, there's one more thing that they have in common that you may not have noticed. And that gets people curious. Now you've punched a hole in the pattern that you pointed out. There's a big question mark. They don't know what it is. This Zeigarnik effect, by the way, again, going back to soap operas or comic books, if you do serial messaging to your audience where you send them sequences of messages that never end, you just constantly are messaging them to talk to them about the next new thing that you're doing. The Zeigarnik effect is very powerful in that regard because you can always leave one bit out of what you're talking about and push that to the next episode, the next message, the next email, whatever the case is, to keep people connected and coming back to complete the loop that you left open. But here we're just talking about single messaging. So you've pointed out everything everyone has in common, and you've asked them, can you spot the hole in the pattern? Can you see what they all have in common that you might not think of? Now, this is a little bit of a sneaky word play, I guess you would call it, a mind play, maybe. But the idea is the reason they can't spot it is because what you're actually going to point out to them is that what they all have in common is that they are missing one certain thing. None of them have it. So it's a commonality of what they do not actually have. Guess what that's going to be? That is going to be your one thing that you do different, the one thing that you are unique with, and you're going to tell them why that matters, why it's better to have that than to not have it. And it makes it clear that you have all the other things that you pointed out that maybe are good about those competitors. You don't have all of those negatives, but you do have this one thing they're all missing, and that's what makes you better. Again, that taps into that von Restorff effect. Now that they've seen the pattern of sameness, and you have this unique thing that stands out, even if they don't take you up on whatever offer you're making today, it's compelling and intriguing because it's different. It stands out. It's not the same old that everyone else is doing 10 times over. There's a unique factor here. And if you talk about it as an advantage, why it's better to have that unique thing in play than to not, then you can see why this is obviously beneficial. Now, using those two things in tandem basically lets you create and start conversations in the marketplace that are not really like, hey guys, I'm different and you're unique, you should buy from me. Instead, you're creating a context by calling out the entire rest of the marketplace and calling out patterns that they recognize and placing yourself within it. There's obviously an advantage of this because it shows that you're not an outsider, you're not pushing your way in, you're not bullshitting them. You belong in this space because you recognize all these commonalities and you are putting yourself within it as someone with something unique to offer, right? There's a reason for you to exist, and you are a meaningfully different choice in the marketplace because you don't do things like everyone else does. So by combining those two effects, you take advantage on and hijack that brain mechanism of becoming instantly bored with things that you recognize as a pattern. So maybe they didn't even see that pattern you pointed out, but now that you pointed out, they can't stop thinking about it. You created a gap in that pattern, which is compelling. Oh my, what's in that gap? What's missing? Why, it is this guy, and he stands out. He's completely different. That's memorable. And it combines the likelihood that they will be less interested and more bored with all the other alternatives and more interested in and compelled by your differentiator that you've given them. Hopefully that makes sense to you. If not, come to Friday's training. We'll go into it in more detail and you can ask questions. So looking at the way you use those two psychological effects woven into your messaging as a way to position you as someone unique and different in a field of sameness, hopefully I have fulfilled the subject of today's episode, puncturing patterns for profit. So that's it. Like I said, this is an episode 0. I'm easing my way back into doing the show. I intend to make them longer and longer as I get more comfortable with the technology that I'm, again, using for the first time. I would love to have some feedback and interaction from the audience. So submit your questions, your ideas for topics. I want it to be an interactive show that meets your needs as my audience as we grow into it. If you like today's topic, do let me know. If you are interested in other things that have to do with persuasion, marketing, copywriting, freelancing, being a solopreneur, etc., selling things online, I'm available to speak to you anytime I do one-off consulting, or we can do long mentoring or coaching packages. If you watch this video and you're like, man, I love that guy, I want to talk to him every week for a year, that is available, but I don't expect you to get there from only watching one video. But again, lots of training. We're doing another live training this Friday on 13 pattern breaking attention grabbers. So tying into the concepts that we talked about here today, going into more detail and giving you 13 meaningfully different angles that you can use these forces in your own messaging and marketing, positioning and branding too, even. Also, as I mentioned, the Cult of Copy has existed since 2012. Over those 10 years, I've done tons and tons of trainings for the group. They are all available on a membership site called The Vault that is available monthly or annually. You can find out more about all of this stuff at cultofcopy.com, where you can also subscribe to our daily devotional email list, where I send you some smart stuff that will make you a better copywriter and a smarter person in general every single day. Guaranteed or your money back. So check that out at your leisure. Thank you so much for watching. I'm not going to keep you any longer. I've covered the topic that I wanted to cover. As I said, I hope future episodes get bigger and bolder with more content and more interaction from you, answering the questions that you send and ask me, and covering the topics that you suggest. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Next episode will be even better, I promise. I will try and do that one at the same time and day. We'll see if it sticks. Like I said, it's a brand new thing. So currently, anyway, Wednesdays, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern, I will be here live recording these shows for you. That's it. I'm the Reverend Dr. Sir, Colin D. Terrio, Pontifex Maximus of the Cult of Copy. Show over. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.